Hello, I'm Maxim Horman. Today I would like to talk about how we draw accessibility forward in Watch Dogs Legion. And to start, a few words about myself. I am a senior game designer on Watch Dogs Legion with more than 13 years in game industry, where I worked as a producer, programmer, designer. The more I dug into it, the more I saw the positive impact of accessibility for the project, not only for disabled players, but also how these principles being applied to any aspect of the game can benefit everyone. Our team was really inspired to make our game accessible to as many players as possible. We made it core design principle from the beginning, and as a result, we are proud to have been recognized by the Game Awards as well as Can I Play That, and especially to have received the first 10 out of 10 for the accessibility score Ubisoft ever received from Can I Play That at the time. But we all know that a barrier-free game experience still doesn't exist, unfortunately. It possesses several difficulties for developers, from techniques to processes, and sometimes even lacking expertise or good examples to follow. To humbly contribute to make it easier for other developers, today I'd like to talk a bit about our team setup, our production stories, and give everyone a little peek under the hood for some of our unique features, as well as important lessons from collaborating with users. First, let's take a look at our production process. For Watch Dogs Legion, we had an international team with lead team in Toronto, accessibility team in Montreal, my team, the Codev studio in Kyiv, and the QC accessibility team in Bucharest, and several other teams and Codev studios who had different involvement throughout the development process. During the production of the game's accessibility features, we used the same process we use for the rest of the game. We did our research about the state of the accessibility market at the time, so there weren't much back then. We worked with the accessibility team to gather best practices and predict what is going to be important when we would release. Then, like with any other feature, we invested time and resources into tools and processes very early to allow for fast iteration on items that we predicted would be fluid during production, like HUD or UI. We made sure that accessibility was part of the design documents, particularly for the most complex features. For example, our project had an internal benchmark not to use fonts smaller than 26 pixels, so this allowed not to extensively use assistive settings like HUD or UI resizing. And finally, we ensured that we were constantly dev testing them. Our game has got some unique missions and set pieces, so we created a plan to test our work in each and every combination possible. Thanks to this preparation phase, we managed to implement around 100 accessibility features and settings, covering all areas of accessibility. Most of them brand new, which weren't in any video game before. For the developers in this audience, you know what it means. We essentially managed to avoid getting features cut, even when things like reworking through ECS or reorganizing the HUD could have impacted our features. We used clear documentation, flexible solutions, and a data-driven approach, which allowed for automated import-export of data as the game was evolving. So now, let's take a look at one of the features that benefit from the approach, our control remapping. We started our journey in remapping with keyboard remapping implementation. I would advise you to do the same if you do not already have remapping in your game. But the devil is in the details. There is not only generic QWERTY keyboard. There are also quite widespread alternatives, especially in non-English speaking countries like Doric, Azerty, or something like Colomac. When working on remapping, keep in mind that those layouts can have an impact on players' comfort when using the default control mapping. For example, keys like Q, Y, Z, which usually have default binding in many games, will be placed in different locations, and user will have to move their hand to reach the default mapped key. As we secured this feature and were confident that our approach was good enough, we switched to gamepad customization. You can think about gamepad like a keyboard with less buttons, but this way of thinking about the gamepad created some design challenges for us. First, how to show actions and the buttons they are linked to. As we had this for keyboard, we were confident that we could do the same. However, one of the unexpected issues here was that you shouldn't alter visual representation of the gamepad in game. So instead of having a single generic gamepad, we had to use different visual for each in order to match the exact look of the controller. Another issue was that our style did not fit well for showing combination of controls, since it didn't allow us to nicely represent a control combination when two buttons were pressed at once. Secondly, how can users physically navigate the interface in order to the action and remap them? For example, PC players can use their mouse to simply move the pointer to exact icon. On gamepad, it took us more time to find proper UX flow. So I would suggest to prototype UI first, and then make sure you have room to iterate it a few times. On the left here, you can actually see one of early prototypes, when we tried to fit the gamepad and controls list without great success. Finally, unusable mapping, which would break the game, is not a big deal on PC, but it's for consoles. This is because actions usually do not stack on a single button. PC players, for instance, can just go to the Documents folder and delete the configuration file. But unusual mapping will block a console player from playing the game, and the same trick won't work. The user would have to wipe game data only with saves. To resolve this problem, we implemented conflict resolving and additional rules, like making the pause menu not remappable. The issues we just discussed might be puzzling at the beginning, but they were not the main challenges when developing this feature. All developers want to deliver the most comfortable control mapping possible by default. As a result, we always iterate on it several times over the course of production. Every time it changes, it can have an impact on the design of the remapping screen. For instance, during the whole production, such actions as quick hug, save recruit contact, or remote wheel changed a lot of times. So we decided to take a data-driven approach. The screen was agnostic of any control mapping, like an empty shell. All actions were written down in few data files, which were exported from a single Excel document with a few tables. This way, every time a change was made on the default control mapping, we just had to update a few Excel files, and everything was updated automatically in-game. As our team was able to iterate quickly, it freed up some time at the end of the project to add menu remapping with very little effort, even we had it not planned to offer it at the beginning of the project. Finally, to sum up this section, in addition to the risks and tips I just shared, don't forget the whole UI, including tutorials and hints, should properly reflect changes in mapping. Now, another feature close to my heart was the visualized sound effects, which we call gameplay events captions in the options menu. You may remember this feature from Far Cry New Dawn, and we knew players were very happy with this feature. An interesting story is that it was actually a Watchdog feature first. But since we worked together and shared our tips and expertise, you saw it first in Far Cry New Dawn. For those of you who didn't have a chance to see it yet, here is how it looks in action. As you may see here, the player is igniting the car by hacking it and driving it into another car. And when two cars collide, we visually display the sound and the direction it's coming from with an arrow. This is even more important when someone is shooting at you from the back, or an enemy is sneaking behind you with loud footsteps while you are trying to steal the trait allocation. So how do you do it? Step 1. Create a list of sounds. Step 2. Add subtitles for each sound. Step 3. Be impressed in step 1. Step 4. Don't panic. In reality, we had around 8,900 sounds at Alpha. Several studios were working on the game around the world, and anyone was able to change sounds for its production needs. So when I started adding subs to each sound on this list, I spent the whole day and got velocity of 5 minutes per sound. They gave us rough estimates of 4 months to implement just this feature. Quite challenging, I would say, so we need something better. After some time of back and forth, we came up with this idea. First, we split the sounds into big logical groups, like ambient, vehicle, or drones. Then we added sub-elements to each group. For example, the vehicle group had sounds on tires, motors, crashes. We used Excel formulas to filter the sounds by groups and subgroups in order to easily add new ones in the future. We identified big group of sounds that wouldn't need visualization, like some very ambient sounds which were not important for gameplay. And we finished by creating the actual text to the remaining sounds. This way, we managed to reduce the time for creating the data needed for this feature, and more importantly, we had tools to be able to update the sounds when required, without being dependent on other team members and blocking their work. Once we had created the data, the next step was to prove it by creating a prototype. At first, we just showed the visualized sounds effect instead of dialogue at the bottom. But the first tester faced a few problems. It was breaking the normal dialogue flow, and there was actually other sounds in the game world. In order not to break the dialogue flow, we moved them to the right side of the screen into separate widget. Now they had their own area. And for the amount of sound displayed, we use the following solution. As I said before, we had split the sound into logical groups. Each sound group determines if it's allowed to be displayed in a particular situation, and we also include several other exclusive criteria, like do not show, if you see the allocation of sound emitter, or if there was already another sound of this type, for example, footsteps. There is no need to show them if you are exploring London or gunfighting. But if you are trying to sneak into a secured zone, the ability to see these footstep sounds will allow you to realize there are guards around the corner, and it may help you save another operative's life. So, when we had the priority system, arrows indicated position on speaker, sound, and no more than 4 lines, we had a chance to meet disabled content creators during Accessible Design Workshop. Their feedback was good, but we still had too much sounds. So we reduced the list of sound in 2 times, from 200 unique subtitles to 110 For example, a lot of ambient sounds are now gone, like fridges, servers, ventilation, and so on. Remember that this feature is not intended to show subtitles for every sound, but rather to assist players who play with no sound at all. So, if you decide to have this feature in your game, think in advance about good pipeline to easily add, remove sounds, and reduce the impact of the main risk, which is the amount of sounds in modern games. And make sure you have good testing plan in place, because there's a lot of data. This feature also helps us to learn a good extra lesson. Do not communicate important gameplay feedback by sound alone, even if you have advanced subs as we do. And the last feature I want to talk about today is aim lock on. When we started to implement aim lock on, we were not yet confident how this feature should work. At first, we didn't even account for drones or mission objects, and we encountered performance issues at early stage. Here is an example of prototype work during the alpha stage. The prototype had several major problems. It allowed to select targets only to the left or to the right. The vertical axis stick could only be used to adjust target point, and by default we aim at any targets, even behind cover. And few others. We have drones, and they could be up or down. Players could hold high ground. Enemies could stand close to each other, but on different aid. Differently, actually, there is a 3D game in 3D space. So we had to rework the wall feature with a new design. The color pillars for the new 3CS for aim-lock to overcome the issues of old design was: select targets should take into account direction of stick move. The system should check targets by priorities in order of importance order. Target under attackable, enemies, drones, vehicles with reinforcements, and the last one, quest objects. It should check the target is available for aiming, not behind the wall, not dead, etc. And finally, check targets in central zone of the screen. This was needed to prevent camera rapid movements for 180 degrees if targets are at the opposite side of the screen. When we polished this design, we also added multiple questions based on user intention. For example, what do user wants to do when they move the stick? Are they just adjusting the target point or selecting a new target, or they just want to move camera? For Watchdog Legion we used partial solution. We made an assumption that moving the stick left or right was intended to select a target, and moving up and down was intended to adjust the aim point to an NPC head. Which target should be selected first? From the start we had target priorities, but sometimes we had to add unique exceptions. For example, should we prioritize the Albion cars with reinforcements, or the drone weak spot, or should we prioritize the object targets that had to be destroyed? We also had to limit the area in which cameras stick to the target. Otherwise, targets which were very far were rotated camera too fast, so it became very difficult for players to keep track of their position in the world. And on top of that, we added the risk to induce motion sickness. And how long should we hold the aiming point over a target? For example, if a target dies or is no longer valid, or hidden behind the wall or cloaked, shall we keep the aim locked on these targets? All these questions need answers. For Watchdog Legion, we decided to keep the target locked for a small amount of time if the target was not visible anymore. So here our learnings after development offers the possibility for users to tweak some settings like errors, thickness, priorities, exclusions, etc. Mission objects are also valid targets, but they might be non-human nature, doors, vehicles, bars, etc. In open-world game, think about performance early. There are hundreds of objects that could be valid of targets, and much more. We spent work of 3 teams 1014 hours. The features that I have described closely are only a small part of all other features that we implemented for Watchdog Legion. Each of them could be challenging to implement and may require new issues which require to iterate. And some of them may bring issues you may only realize upon release. As a good example of that issue, one reviewer completely missed the option to remap escape key, despite it being very important for him. So make sure that options are easy to find, even in submenus and lists. Now that we've taken a look at some of the core design elements that we focused on to really push flexibility like never before in the Watch Dogs franchise, I want to drill down on some takeaways. We had several teams involved in making this game as accessible as it today. Creating an inclusive product truly is a team of effort. Because we started to think about accessibility early, we managed to blend into the process. And we use a data-driven approach which allows us to be very flexible when uninevitable changes happen during production. Listen to the community. Remember that community always says, nothing about us without us. Involve disabled players in development phase and even read their reviews. By involving our players early, it helps us tremendously for this game and for any other game I'm going to work on in the future. Use any opportunity to show your game and its features. Collaborate with content creators. Involve them in your demos. It really helps us to polish and give the final touch before release. And the real takeaway is to see how these features really matter to our players. Thank you. I'll be available after the session to answer the questions.